spinning back to the open side. Karim Bete, up the goal here to Samu, who's quick. Pete Samu looking for Karim Bete. Back to Samu. Oh, that is wonderful. That is wild. That is amazing from the Wallabies.
Hello and welcome to the Ryan Lonergan Fan Appreciation Podcast. We provide a platform for Ryan admirers to come together and support the man who plays rugby as though he's an angel from heaven. Fanboys, going weak at the knees, we do it all for you, our dear Ryan. I'm your host, Ando. With me is Mitch. And tonight, we've got a lot to cover. We're going to cover the Wallaby squad announcement, Super W Round 2, Super Rugby Pacific Round 6, the match of the week, which is the Brumbies and the Waratahs, and then the locker room. Mitch, you were down in Canberra. How are you?
Yeah, very good. It was awesome to be able to get down and actually meet Ryan Lonergan. Let's call him Lion now. Lion Lonergan in the flesh. So I was hoping, I was really excited because just before kickoff, they brought around these giant faces of all the players and handed them out to the fans. And there was a kid maybe 4 or 5 rows away from me who got given the Ryan Lonergan face, and I was hoping to sort of pinch it off him or something, but it didn't eventuate. So sorry, Ando, you don't have a giant Ryan Lonergan face behind you as we record tonight.
Did he get to take it home, or is it something that they just hand out and take back at the end of the game?
Well, I was expecting to see them hand them back after the game, but no. Once the final siren was sounded, all the fans were able to get onto the field, and a lot of the kids were running around getting the faces signed by the players. So definitely were able to take them home, which was a really cool initiative.
That'd be amazing. I mean, we've got our photos with Ryan now, so kind of the shrines can be completed at home. But imagine having that like oversized face of Ryan Lonergan watching you as you sleep. It'd be all your dreams come true.
Yeah, there's the line, and I feel like the giant face might be just a bit over that line.
Who knows, mate? Who knows? Well, either way, we have a lot to be talking about. Mitch is going to be talking us through his experiences watching both the Waratahs men and women down in Canberra, which was a great experience. But Mitch, first off, can you take us through the top 3 contenders for our Super Rugby tipping results, please?
Yeah, so well done to Dan G or Jojo Rabbit, who's still in first place. He was there last week and he's managed to hang on. So he's on 32 points, followed closely by Paul F on 31 points, sharing third spot, or they're both sort of sharing first, second, and third. Frejo T is in third place as well. So well done to them. Ando, you're in 20th spot, so you've come up the table very nicely this week.
Yeah, I've gone up about 22 or 24 points from last week. I did have a look where you are. Do you know where you are?
150, I think.
Yeah,
somewhere around
about 150th. About 150th, mate.
We've got about 300 people, so I'm not doing too badly, really. I'm not doing well. Definitely not doing well, but not doing too badly. I wonder if, with that amount of people, I think if you get, plus 200, you're into the area of the people that forget to put their tips in. So if you're in that area and you're actually having a crack and putting your tips in each week, you're not doing very well. So I'm close.
Power to you.
I'm close to that level.
Well, mate, hopefully we would be hoping that you can be picking the game up from here. Although many of your tips are at this point just chasing an upset, which is very enjoyable and creates a bit of banter and commentary on the socials as well. What we might do,
I've got to say though, this week there was a lot of people that wrote in on social media and sort of questioned my thoughts of backing the Reds on Friday night. But Eddie Jones came out in his podcast earlier on Friday afternoon and said he was also backing the Reds and thought they might cause the upset. So once I heard that, I was proud. I was ready to back the boys. And then once it kicked off and the game started, I was like, oh, what have I done?
Yeah, you're both wrong. It's simple.
Yeah.
You chose a losing
if I'm backing what the Wallabies coach is saying, I'm not doing too badly.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a look in a moment and say that you can't really believe what the Wallaby coach says. Because he said a lot of things about what the team was going to look like with his Wallaby squad announcement, and we found out it was kind of anything but that. So We'll get into that in a moment, but we have 2 simple calls to action before we get into the pod proper. Number 1, join our Discord channel. If you want to be a part of the best Australian rugby community going around, join Discord. There's a link on all of our social media profiles, so just go through there. And a second one, please consider going to ko-fi.com/pickanddriverugby and supporting the podcast with a one-off or a monthly payment. We do this for love, not money, but every little bit counts, and we really appreciate the support of the generous ladies and gentlemen who have supported us. I think we've got a bunch of people with $5 a month, and that's basically the price of a coffee in Sydney these days. So we really, really appreciate that ongoing support. A little bit for you means a lot for us. So thank you very much. So Mitch, without any further ado, why don't we jump into the Wallaby squad announcement?
Let's go. Now, the Wallaby squad, the first Wallaby squad under Eddie Jones has been announced for 2023, and there's a few upsets. There's a few interesting inclusions in this squad. Before we dive through who did make the cut and who was unlucky to miss out, Ando, what are your general thoughts over this squad?
Look, I feel like I've been lied to here, mate. I found this really hard when the squad dropped, because Eddie on his podcast, aptly called Eddie, very clearly said that he picks two teams of 15, so the best two players in each position, and then he was going to pick 3 extras, making a squad of 33. So you and I, well, mostly me, but you had an opportunity to have a quick look at it, picked our best 2 teams essentially, and suggested those on the internet, on Twitter, on socials, and turns out that there are a whole bunch of players that in no way, shape or form deserve inclusion if you're basing it on players picking themselves, which is what Eddie always says, picking the best players in each position. Look, he just didn't go and pick what he said he was going to. So it was a very interesting squad that he has selected.
So we moved through who was announced in the squad, particularly for those that are playing along at home and are not watching the YouTube screen and can't see the list next to our beautiful, pretty faces. Let's dive through the players that were announced and the ones, and we'll break it down into positions. So loosehead props, he's gone with Tom Robertson, Shoop, and Slipper. Now, do we want to go through the whole squad, then talk about individual players, or
let's go forwards? Let's go forwards and then backs.
All right. So hookers, we've got Ulesi, Lonergan, and Parecki. Tight head props, only 2 named: Alan Alaalatoa and Pone Faumasili. We've then got in the locks, Frost, Swain, Neville, Holloway, and Hannigan. And then loose forwards, Gleeson, Hooper, McWright, Samu, Wilkin, and Valentini. Now, there are already a few names there that are jumping out and are sort of surprised to be included. What are your thoughts around the forward pack that he has selected so far?
Well, I think the first part is, like, how is Jordan Ulesi there? I find that really interesting. He's not even starting hooker at his club, the Rebels, let alone deserving co-op to Wallabies. Really interesting in that in the interview that Eddie did today on Sunday with a bunch of journos, he spoke in a way that seemed to indicate he was thinking of Tolu Latu when he was talking. So he was talking about a bunch of like off-field indiscretions that Ulesi had supposedly got into, and I was like, I don't think he has. That's Latu. So it was really odd.
So he's named the wrong player.
No, I think just in that moment he was referring to the wrong player as he was answering that question. But either way, it was pretty funny. He did say about Ulesi that he really likes him. He's a big, ugly bloke, is quote what he said. He's tall, he's strong, carries hard, and he wants to give him the opportunity to show that he's grown up a bit. So take that as you will. That's the comments that Eddie had about Ulesi.
Now, I guess one of the things we also need to sort of say, and it's not included in our little graphic here on the screen for our YouTube followers, but there are 2 other groups of players that will be included in this squad. So the first group of players is the rehab group. So the players who are currently injured and not sort of doing any on-field work. So that group includes Angus Bell, Rob Leota, and Taniela Tupou. He then also announced a group of international or overseas-based players who will be joining the squad via Zoom. And look, say what you will around this, there's more than 3 or 4 names in this list, and so what does that give us an indication for the Ghetto Law later on? But before we jump to that, those players were Richie Arnold, Tom Banks, Quade Cooper, Bernard Foley, Mariko Korobetti, Samu Karevi, and Will Skelton. There also are a number of players as well that weren't considered due to injury. Those players are Flaufa Nga'aa, Tom Liner, Alex Murphy, Hunter Paisami, Matt Phillip, and Isaac Rodder. So I think a lot of people have sort of mentioned that Alex Murphy probably should be included over Ulesi, but they have sort of clarified that the reason he hasn't been included in this squad at the moment is due to injury.
Yep, fair enough. And maybe you can include Flaufa Nga'aa in that bracket as well, even though I personally don't think he should be. He has, next to Parecki, he's probably the most experienced. Actually, he's probably got more Wallabies caps than Parecki.
No, he does. Yeah, he does.
Yeah. So, yeah, look, it was really interesting. I think the challenge with players like Shoop Ulesi and even like Swain to an extent is that they're not particularly form players. They're not people that have played themselves into the team at all. And that was one of the dominant messages that Eddie has been putting out over the last kind of 6 weeks or so throughout the season, that the players pick themselves, that those who have played with enough energy, consistency, whatever you want to say, whatever adjective you want to give, they needed to be the ones that put themselves forwards. And Swain hasn't. He's barely played. He's been injured for the last few weeks. Shoop has been good. But he's mostly been coming off the bench for the Brumbies, 5 games, 2 starts. And Ulesi hasn't been that amazing either. So it's really interesting the way that he's obviously got this like second perception or string of players, a way of thinking that he wants to see more of, and he wants to get into the camp to see how they go in that high performance environment.
Now, I want to focus on that point you've just mentioned and come back to it in a second. Now, I think it is important we run through the rest of the squad, so the backs. Maybe then we can focus on some of the players that weren't named that were kind of expected. So in halfbacks, we do have Nick White and Ryan Lonergan. In the fly half, we've got Donaldson, Gordon, and Hodge. In the centres, we've got Fluke, Feketi, Ikitau. And then outside backs, we have Wright, Vunivalu, Nwangani Tawasi, Pataya, Kellaway, and Jorgensen. So some interesting names there, definitely. Some big names that didn't make the list. I guess if we talk about the players that have missed out in the squad entirely, Harry Wilson's one that comes to mind. Noah Lolesio is another one. The point you were making before around the makeup of this squad and sort of what Eddie's plan is, I personally think that what he's doing with this is he's playing mind games, and it's really a rocket under the butts of the players that weren't named. Those players like James O'Connor, Noah Lolesio, and Harry Wilson particularly, to say, look, I need to see more from you. And the reason I've included these other players over the top of you so far this season is because they might not necessarily be ahead of you in selection at the moment, but I want to see more from you, and I want to see how you respond to this non-inclusion in this squad.
Yep. And I think that's a massive part of it. Like the amount of money the RA have probably spent over the last 2 weeks with whatever marketing connection they have with the local butchers around most of the players. So they can send out a whole bunch of sausages to the players who haven't been picked and steaks to those who have. It's really, really interesting because you've got Tate McDermott and Jake Gordon, who have both been staples within Wallaby squads in the Dave Rennie era, who have both missed out, and deservedly so in a way. Their form hasn't been great, and Ryan Lonergan has been very good along with Nick White down at the Brumbies. So you can't like say that neither of those two deserve to be there, but it's interesting that that McDermott and Gordon aren't there. But then you also have players like Harry Wilson, Noah Lolesio, James O'Connor, who haven't been included, who you just think, particularly for Wilson, and that is rough. He has been one of the form back rowers so far this season. He's been excellent. And for a squad that they're not actually playing a game, why not bring Wilson into the fold and change his narrative over the last couple of years to say, mate, we've got our eyes on you. You're valued, you're valuable, and we think you're going to do well. Keep working hard.
Was there anything that Eddie said? Now, you did attend the announcement interview of sorts with Eddie Jones this afternoon. Was there anything that he specifically spoke to around the players that weren't included?
Oh, look, he specifically said he would not comment on individual players and why they didn't make the squad. So that was literally the very first thing that he said within the meeting. But he did provide some broader comments on what he was looking for and what the communication to players who'd missed out was like. So he had spoken to around 15 players this morning who hadn't made the squad, and he'd given them an indication of what the Wallabies, as a broader coaching unit, feel those players need to be doing to kind of bang down the door of Wallabies selection. And the basic message was you need to be performing more consistently at a high level and you'll be getting selected, because in the Wallabies environment, quote, they'll have to work harder than they've ever worked in their life, end quote. So he obviously wants players to recognize the next level that they need to be going to in terms of their effort in every element of their professional performance.
Now, there are questions already being asked around social media around a player, Suli Vunivalu, particularly, how he makes the squad over a player like Toole, who's had a really, really strong start to Super Rugby this year. And Vunivalu, in like being realistic, has been underwhelming so far. Was there anything that Eddie sort of spoke about either of those, either inclusions or exclusion?
Yeah, there were. He spoke about Sully. He kind of dodged the fact that Sully's been really poor so far this season. He really hasn't shown much. Because a
Other
couple
than the
of
fact that he plays league and Eddie Jones just froths the leaguey.
A couple of the journos kind of called him on it in a polite way, but just saying you're picking players on performance. Suli Vunivalu perhaps hasn't been in the best of form this season, despite his undoubted talent. Can you speak to his inclusion within the squad? Which I thought was a great way of saying it. So basically, Eddie just replied, "Oh, I've seen him at the Storm. I've seen him for Oz A and playing for Queensland. He's an absolute specimen. He's still got a lot of gaps in his game, but we're looking for world-class players, and we want to see how they go in our Wallabies environment." So make of that what you will. Maybe he thinks he can get something a bit extra out of Sully, or maybe he thinks that this inclusion will kind of spark something within Sully for the remainder of SRP. Who knows? But it is the talking point, and it's possibly the best example of him, as Eddie Jones, not doing what he said in a lead-up. Because if you're picking players on form and performance, you do not pick Suli Vunivalu for this Wallaby squad.
The other question around that too is Ben Donaldson's inclusion over Noah Lolesio. Like, Donaldson's been playing fly half and fullback this season, and at the moment, I wouldn't be confident in naming him in either of those positions for the Wallabies. Whereas I feel like Lolesio is settled and has performed quite well for the Brumbies in that position. So again, whether he's picking on that selection on potential rather than actual performance so far is interesting. Jorgensen's a player as well that's been included in this squad. Was there any comments around him, whether he's been included as like a development player who's just there to kind of take in and soak in the atmosphere, or whether he really does feature quite heavily in Eddie's plans?
Yeah, the question was asked about whether there were any kind of development players within the squad, obviously directed towards Jorgensen. And Eddie's response was absolutely not. All 33 players are definitely within a frame of World Cup selection. I don't think there's any other answer that he probably could have given this close to the World Cup. He did say that he really liked the pace that Jorgensen offered, the confidence that he has, and the skills that he's being able to execute as well. So yeah, he was quite complimentary towards Jorgensen. But in terms of Ben Donaldson, he did say that he had really... Where are my notes about this?
He just said that he plays for Randwick, and if you play for Randwick, then you're a Wallaby in waiting.
Then you're in.
You're in.
He said that he wanted to get a better and closer look at Donaldson. He knew that Donaldson hadn't actually played that many games at 10 so far this season, and so he wanted to have a closer look at him at 10. And yeah, it was really interesting because, I mean, whilst Donaldson's started all 6 games for the Waratahs so far this season, a few of them have been at 15, whilst Noah has only played 5 and started 4 games. He's still done relatively well within, like, I don't think he's set the world on fire so far, but maybe Donaldson, maybe Eddie thinks that Donaldson's like ceiling for improvement is higher.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of where we're at mostly with this squad. Carter Gordon's in there, which is good to see. I think he's been picked on potential. Brad Wilkin as well, all been picked on form so far this season. It's awesome to see their involvements. Was there anything else that Eddie said in that presser that you wanted to just touch on before we finish up and move on?
The back three, he's got no particular idea over the specific positions at this point in time. There's still a fair bit of time before the Wallabies even play their first game against South Africa. And so we've got a bit of time. And so he's like, I just wanted to get back three players, get them in, take a closer look, and then figure out their specific positions a little bit closer too. He was really impressed with Josh Fluke's feel for the game and the way that he's kind of in the right places and growing within matches. There was this really well asked question by Ian Payton, I think it was, who seemed to indicate is Brad Wilkins' inclusion as an on-the-ball player indicating some different thinking around number 7, which I thought was a brilliant way of kind of trying to needle in and get something about Hoops moving forward, because Hooper's form hasn't been the greatest in 2023. And he said, look, no, we just need players that are hard on the ball, and Wilkin is one of those options. McBride also has promise, and he's happy with Hooper's experience and the way he's growing this season. Interesting to note, though, you have 3 dedicated 7s within the loose forwards. Like, all 3 of Hooper, McWright, and Wilkin are only 7s. So I think that indicates maybe some more thoughts about Holloway and Hannigan potentially being a lock or 6, with the expectation that players like Swain or some of the overseas options like Arnold or other locks who are overseas as well, Skelton. And the like. Become options too. So that was just interesting. And then I think lastly around captaincy, he doesn't yet have any idea and doesn't really need to have an idea around who the captain will be. He's been working with the senior leadership team that had been under Dave Rennie, and he hasn't seen any need to make changes from there. And so they are committed, quote, to being a world-class leadership group. No, their commitment to being a world-class leadership group is there, end quote. So it may well be, he also dropped, it may well be they have more than one captain. So I thought that was interesting too.
So Ryan Lonergan will be captain when he comes off the bench.
Can you imagine? Yeah. Cool. And the final thing is he really admired what Hamish McLennan and Andy Marinos are doing from a kind of PR and marketing perspective around the Joseph Suali'i signing. He thinks that they've bought relevance back into the market with the signing of Suali'i, and we're back competing as a major sport in terms of like column inches, radio minutes, that kind of thing. They're talking about rugby, and Eddie continued to joke about whether he'll even be around as a coach in 2025 to be coaching Suali'i if the results don't go his way. So obviously that's just him deflecting the actual question, but it was interesting to see how positive Eddie is towards the signing in a broader sense for rugby.
The only other point that I've got around this squad is I find it really interesting that he hasn't gone with 3 scrum halves, particularly because you can't go to a World Cup with only 2. It's just under current HIA issues, one of those other players has to make it. And at the moment, whether it's just he doesn't know who that third one is yet.
No, he had a clear answer. He had a clear answer for this. He said that they're only going to have 2 45-minute training sessions across the 2 days or a few days in camp. And so he just wants basically every player that's there, particularly for a specialized position like a scrum half, to just play. And so he only wanted 2 scrum halves in the squad.
Okay, interesting. Cool. And then was there anything else around Arnold?
Exactly where I was going to go.
Yep. Where's he come from? Completely out of the blue.
Yeah, so he said that when he was over in France, he caught up with Hugo Monnier, who is the coach of, I think it's Toulouse, that Richie Arnold plays for. Whoever Hugo Monnier coaches. And he said he had a catch up with him. He'd been tracking Richie's progress and been really positive. And so wanted to kind of include him within that overseas playing connection. But then he also said about Rory Arnold, quote, "We don't pick players who don't play rugby," end quote. Another quote, "Isn't he working on a factory line making hinos?" End quote. Because if like his Rory Arnold's team has self-withdrawn from the top league because one of their players got caught with a whole bunch of drugs, taking drugs. So because of
issues.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it was like cocaine related. Because of that, the whole team, as a kind of like self-enforced punishment, have withdrawn from the competition. So Rory Arnold's not playing rugby, and he hasn't even bothered to come back to Australia to keep playing rugby. So maybe there's more to that story as to why he hasn't come back, even temporary, just on a loan basis to keep playing. But he said, mate, we're not going to pick him if he's not playing rugby. And it was a pretty direct attack. Well, not attack, pretty harsh and direct comment, I'll say.
Yep. It's fair enough too. I mean, there's from what I've heard, RA has made contact with him and offered and just to start that conversation, and he's just shut it down. So I guess in their eyes, look, if he's not wanting to come back and play even on a short term when the opportunity's there, why should you be getting a spot in the World Cup over someone who is playing in Australia and putting that commitment into the Super Rugby?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Well, any other thoughts, or shall we move across now to the Super W and the weekend's performances?
Mate, as much as we could talk about the Wallabies for another 20, 30 minutes, we do have to move on. Otherwise, it's going to be a super long one. So why don't we keep on going?
Yeah, let's get going.
All right, moving now to the next part of the pod. We're going to track through the Super W Round 2 and then Super Rugby Pacific Round 6. Now, Super W, 3 games per weekend. The first match, Reds versus the Force, 29-14. Second game, Drua versus the Rebels, 39-12. And the third match, the Brumbies versus the Waratahs, 13-24. We're going to start with the last game. And Mitch, you were down at GIO Stadium in Canberra for the Brumbies versus the Waratahs. What were your kind of first thoughts about this game being there in person?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is the Brumbies women's team has really come a long way in its last off season. They really pushed the Waratahs women and held them for long periods of time. We've seen in the past that the Waratahs women seem to be a bit of a step above the other teams in the comp, but through whatever it is, through personnel changes or just the evening of talent across the board, the other teams are coming up and are competing well. So the Brumbies women definitely were in this game for the majority of it.
Yeah, brilliant. And that was one of the things that I kind of took away was the improvement within the Brumbies team. Their defense and their line out were significant, have improved significantly. They kept the Drua last week to, what was it, 12, only scoring 12 points or something like that, 12-7.
Yeah, it was like 12-7 or something.
Yeah, 12-7 or 12-5. It was really, really low scoring. And so across these 2 games, they've shown a significant improvement in their defensive connections and being able to actually compete with teams for longer periods within the match. Although the Tars, in my mind, had more strike power in the wide attack, they really weren't able to exert the dominance that we would normally see in kind of the scrums, the lineouts, and through their in-tight carries. They gained a bit of parity in tight, but then they weren't dominant as I would have come to expect. So that was really interesting to see how much the Brumbies have improved.
Yep. And shout out as well to Piper Duck, the captain of the Waratahs women's team. It's her birthday today. So happy birthday to her, and well done on leading the team well. Saw her walking through the stadium about halftime of the men's game and sort of gave her a bit of a pat on the back, which was cool to see as well.
Awesome. Just a couple of shout outs as well. Maya Stewart got a double. Georgina Frederick setting up incredibly well for the second try. Ella Ryan scored a great try within the first half with a massive dummy, and she would have enjoyed that moment having previously played for the Brumbies, now having come over to the Waratahs. And I think it's Caitlin Halsey won the game in a 76th minute with an incredible try, taking the ball out wide, drifting, but then accelerating through a gap. Did it incredibly well. 16 years of age. Can't emphasize that enough. So Mitch, are you all good if I quickly run through the other 2 games from the weekend?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, sweet. So the first game of the weekend was the Reds versus the Force, 29-14 to the Reds. It was a pretty close run match despite the final scoreline. The Reds were only winning by 5 with 20 minutes to go, and it was pretty impressive from the Force to keep the Reds that close, considering that the Force have struggled over the last couple of seasons shows some pleasing improvement for them. The Reds are going to be pretty happy that their improved match fitness enabled them to finish strong. That has been an area of focus for them this season, and they were really helped with the experience from Shannon Parry to help within those final few minutes. Just scored a great meat pie there. One quick shout out I will say to Queensland Rugby is jump onto YouTube and search for Under the Surface Queensland Reds. It is a really, really good kind of behind the scenes docu-series about the Queensland Reds Super W team. Got 2 episodes out at the moment, so really well done. Gives you lots of great insight about the team, their goals for the season, and a lot of the kind of personalities and characters within that squad. So yeah, highly recommend watching that. And then the Drua versus the Rebels. Drua 39, Rebels 12. Look, it was an improvement last week for the Rebels, but it still wasn't good enough, obviously, against the Drua, who were a quality side. I'm going to say, mate, the defense was really concerning. There was the first try to the Drua was in like the 6th or 7th minute of the game, and it came off a line out where I won't name the player because I don't want to name and shame, but one of the Rebels players at the back of the line out literally walked after hitting the ground to their position where they were meant to be defending the tail of the line out, and a Fijiana player just ran straight through it, like ran straight through the gap that player should have been in.
It's
and
just
I was
a
just
lapse
thinking,
in judgment.
Oh, it was just, I don't know what it was. Maybe she didn't know she forgot in that moment. That's where she needed to be. So there wasn't that urgency, but she was literally walking.
A new call. Still
I don't
learning the
know.
calls.
I want there to be some reason other than just laziness or something.
So
hopefully,
I don't think anyone could be sort of accused of laziness at this level. But yeah, I reckon it's just a defense
game. In the 6th.
Yeah, defensive error, or I thought I was meant to be out of the line out, and oh no, this is the one that I'm in, so I better get in there. And too late.
Oh yeah, who knows? But look, the Drua were just running such strong, hard unders lines that when the Rebels players were tired, they weren't able to get across and make effective tackles. So the Drua are either making breaks or getting offloads away, and the Rebels just couldn't keep up with that. So yeah, well done from the Drua. Some general improvement from the Rebels who experienced a pretty hefty defeat last week. So a little bit of improvement from them, and hopefully we see more moving forward. But mate, that's my quick wrap up for the Super W.
Now I want to shout out to all New South Wales fans. Next weekend, the Waratahs men's team has a bye. So they won't be playing, but the Waratahs women are playing the Fijiana in Drua in Sydney, Concord Oval on Saturday, the 8th of April, 3:05 p.m. Make sure you get there. This is going to be an absolute treat of a game. The 2 leading teams in this competition going at it, rematch from last year's final. The Fijiana team's definitely going to be up for it, but the Waratahs women are going to be even more up and wanting to get revenge on their first ever loss in Super W history last year in the final. So if you can, make sure you do get there. Cracking new stadium, brand new facilities, Easter long weekend, no excuses really.
I'm going to be there with my eldest. It's going to be a lot of fun. So we've got a family lunch at 12 and we'll be leaving out straight on the dot at 2 to get out there in time. So Fantastic. Very excited. We'll both be in our Waratahs kit, ready to cheer the girls on.
Awesome. That is so good to hear. Well done, Ando. So let's now move across to the Super Rugby Pacific, the men's game, round 6, the results. We'll quickly run through those and then we might jump into a few points from some of the games. So we had on Friday night, Moana Pacifica hosting the Highlanders in Auckland. 17-45 was the final score there to the Highlanders. We then had the Reds up against the Crusaders. Crusaders too good there, 25-12 against the Reds. On Saturday afternoon, we had the Fijian Drua hosting the Melbourne Rebels. Now, this one was hotly contested in the tips, but it did end up going the Drua's way, 38-28 in that result. We then had the New Zealand Derby, Chiefs versus Blues. Chiefs coming over the Chocolates there, 20-13. We then had the game of the round, which I was lucky enough to attend in person, and that was the Waratahs and the Brumbies down in Canberra. Brumbies absolutely breaking hearts of all New South Wales fans, getting the victory there, 40-36 in somewhat controversial circumstances, which we will get to a little bit later. And then we had, finishing off this afternoon, a game that the score itself looks a lot tighter than I think the game actually was, but final score 45-42, Hurricanes against the Force. Hurricanes getting the victory there. Force doing really well to hang on for the bonus point right at the end.
Yep. Yeah, and I think we'll just start with that last game. I'd actually been watching that this afternoon. I was kind of having a nana nap on the couch and had the rugby on. And I just got seriously bored by like the last 15 minutes of the game. I was like, man, this is just a whitewash. The Force defensively just haven't been particularly impressive. The Canes are just absolutely romping. I'm done. I'm just going to turn it off. And then they go ahead and score 3 tries in the final 10 minutes to get a losing bonus point. So that was very surprising when I saw the final score. I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? So I mean,
credit to the Force in that one, and somewhat bit of egg on the Hurricanes' face. Full time, the Hurricanes got a penalty and decided to run it, and I think it was like 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes into extra time. The Force ended up turning it over and then scoring the try, which got them that bonus point. So all the Hurricanes needed to do was tap it and kick it out, but instead they were pushing on to try and get away from the bonus point and ended up conceding one. So, hopefully the Hurricanes can learn from that you just need to kick the ball out sometimes.
Yeah, a couple of comments about the Force. I think what they've shown within this game is that they do have some really strong attacking weapons. Particularly, Kiribiji has been playing really, really well. Chase Tiati is having his moments, even though he gave away a yellow card as well. He's been having his moments of involving himself really, really impressively. But the thing that I'm just concerned with is just they're consistently leaking points. And whenever anybody talks about like game line analytics and teamwork index and all that jazz, the determining factor about players who haven't played together very much is the defensive shape and the defensive ability. And the fact that the Force are leaking points so consistently is really concerning. Like the early parts of the game, the Canes were slicing through them way too easily in ways that they really, really shouldn't have. So I think that's got to be an area that they need to be picking and sticking more and just giving as much possible game time to whatever they think the best 15 is and just stop chopping and changing. But also the Canes are going to be really, really up against it next week. They've got Aidan Morgan out with concussion. I'm not sure how long he's going to be out for if he's available this coming week. Ruben Love was already out with a groin injury, but now Brett Cameron, who was their starting 10, looked like he had a really serious injury in the second half. He was in a lot of pain, managed to walk off the field, but it might well be that they don't actually have like a natural number 10 for the next couple of games. And I think they've got the Chiefs and I can't remember who else, but they've got some pretty hefty games coming up soon.
I've got it up here. So next week the Hurricanes play the Highlanders, and then the following week they play the Chiefs. So hopefully they can get over the Highlanders pretty easy and then sort of limp their way into the Chiefs, who are on red hot fire at the moment. I guess if we talk a little bit around that idea of cohesion and just leaking points left, right, and center, Moana Pacifica, that first game of the weekend against the Highlanders, geez, it's not getting any easier for Moana. They looked, in some ways, they looked better in patches last year than they've put in performances this year. I was expecting this game to be a lot closer than the end-up score being the Highlanders. They're starting to get a bit of a flow on. They've played well the last 2 weeks, but you wouldn't say the Highlanders have played well over the rest of this season. And so this was really one that the Moana should have had penciled in the calendar, that they could have caused an upset and put in a good performance. But again, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think it's just going to show how much other teams have also improved. I don't think Moana have particularly gotten worse, but I don't think they've improved at the same rate as the other teams. And the main difference that I'm seeing between the Fijian and Drua and Moana Pacifica is that home ground advantage that the Drua have playing in Fiji. They've already had 2 home games. Moana are playing the majority of their home games out of Mount Smart Stadium in Auckland. And so I think they've got 2 games that they're going to be playing in Samoa. Is that correct?
Apia, yep.
Apia, yep, okay. So they've got a couple of games they're going to be playing like back home, but it's not good enough for them. They need to be having as many home games as they can back in Samoa or Tonga, and basically be connecting with their communities and connecting with their supporter base that way, because you see what it does for the Drua. They were able to get on top of the Crusaders and pants the Rebels as well, pretty effectively playing at home. So that's just one of the basic things that I think has to change for them as a team and an organization moving forward. I'm sure there's a lot of complexity within that, but just from an external perspective, it's something that I think needs to change for them.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That complexity comes down to basically that Moana Pacifica is currently owned by New Zealand Rugby, and so there's no independence there, whereas the Fijian and Drua is most like 80% owned by Fiji Rugby, with a bit of support from the Australian Institute of Sport or the Australian government. So, yeah, there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes around that. But you would hope by this point in the season, second year, full preseason, that they would start to be putting in a bit more better performances than they're currently doing, which is unfortunate. If we move across to the next game, the Reds
I'll
and the
quickly just
Crusaders.
comment. Sorry, mate,
Yep.
I'm doing a U, and I'm going to quickly jump in with one comment right
Yep.
at the end. 17-19 halftime score, 17-45 full-time score, 26 unanswered second half points. I mean, that's obviously not good enough, but it just shows the challenge that the Moana Pacifica team has facing keeping up with teams in the second half. So,
yeah,
thanks.
definitely. So the second game on Friday night, Red 5-12. What were your thoughts around this game?
Say that again. You just cut out. Which match?
Oh, Reds and Crusaders 25-12.
Brilliant. Yeah, Reds Crusaders. This one was interesting. Like on another night, the Reds could have won this game. They really, really could have. And so they're going to be disappointed with their performances across the match. Like there's some parts where the Reds did really well. Their back row was excellent. I thought Tate McDermott probably had his best game that he's had so far this season. James O'Connor had moments of being good, but also some pretty poor decision-making at key opportunities as well. Isaac Henry, Josh Fluke were also impressive throughout. But I just want to say I copped a little bit of flack for our Wallabies team, right? For including Ned Hannigan in as one of the 4 locks that we'd chosen. And my argument was, well, name me another fit and inform lock within Australian rugby. And a couple of people were saying Ryan Smith. Ryan Smith at the moment is a massive penalty magnet, and I don't think he's making the right decisions at the right times. And there's no better example than the opening try for Fainga'a Nuku. So that comes after there's like a midfield rock, ball's taken up, tackle happens, center of the field, about 35 meters out, 40 meters out. And Ryan Smith's one of the forwards who's meant to be folding and should be the pillar. But he ends up going in and trying to compete at the ruck after the ball's already been won by the Crusaders, and he takes himself out of the defensive line. And so then Willie Hines just comes around and pops the ball off for Fainga'a Nuku to run in basically untouched underneath the posts. And that genuinely was Ryan Smith's just decision-making within that moment, or just wanting to overcommit within trying to put some ruck pressure on the Crusaders. So I think he's a good player, and he's a great guy from his podcast and all the stuff I've seen from him. But I think he's got a lot to work on in terms of decision-making within tight moments. And I think that kind of inexperience within the Reds was their downfall within this game.
What were your thoughts around the decision to go for the sticks? I think they got a penalty in like the 71st minute or the 69th minute. Score ends up being 25-12. It still was at that time. Mm-hmm. Then they get a penalty and they go for post and then they miss it. What's going through the minds of the players in that decision there?
25-12 goes to 25-15.
So you're still down 2 scores with 10-ish minutes to go.
12-19. Yeah, you should have gone for the try, because then if you get the converted try, you're at least within a bonus point. So you get that bonus.
That's right.
Bonus point. So look, I don't know. I'm not in the field. I haven't had to ever make a decision like that before. I personally think it was the wrong one, but maybe there's some better justification on their end, and it only gets compounded because they missed the kick. So
that's right. Yeah, exactly. There is a contentious point that's come up in this game around the legalities around scoring tries, and we will talk about that a little bit later when we get to the locker room. So don't worry, fans, we will get to that. We won't focus on that now. Final 2 games of the weekend, Chiefs and Blues. Not much to say there other than the Chiefs really played better in the conditions. It was a pretty wet and morbid game, that one, but the Chiefs came away with the chockies there, and well done for taking the Blues off. Yep.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that Damien McKenzie absolutely outplayed Beauden Barrett in kind of the All Black 10 stakes. And so at this point, it's between Richie Mo'unga, probably the front runner because of his recent experience playing at 10 for the All Blacks, and then D-Mac is next in line. Beauden Barrett was poor. Did you see him stepping out and bombing that try within like the 17th minute or something like that? It was so amateur from a player of his quality to do that. He will never do that again.
Let's not get too ahead of ourselves there. The legalities around Feketi's try in the Waratahs game.
No, the ball was
Could've
down.
come-
Ball was down before his
I
arm
don't
went.
know.
No, definitely
I don't know.
don't try and compare them.
Anyway.
They are not the same. But yeah, man, that was bad. That was bad from Bowden, and he missed a couple of pretty easy sitters as well. So DMAC is just in great form at the moment, and Bowden hasn't started the way that I was hoping he would when I picked him first in my fantasy team.
Ouch. Unfortunate. And then the final game, Fiji over the Rebels, 38-28. I went the Rebels this game. I was expecting them to sort of roll on with the form that they have come into this game. Fiji last week, not the best performance, but they scored like 3 tries in the opening 15 minutes and just looked absolutely on fire. No team can give the Fijians that amount of space and that amount of lead, particularly when you're playing them in Fiji.
Yeah, and I think a part of it was the Rebels didn't seem to adapt to the conditions and try to keep the game a little bit in tight. They seemed to want to impose an up-tempo, broader style of game upon the Fijians, which just kind of played into their hands. So one of those early tries was I
think you might have frozen there, Ando.
You got me now?
Yes.
All right.
You keep going. We'll edit that little bit out.
3, 2, 1. Yeah, so with the Rebels game, I just thought that they were a little bit too eager to play an up-tempo game, and so that fed into the Ndrua's hands. The early intercept try, I think it was the second try of the game, just showed the Rebels just being a little bit too ready to go wide when they needed to earn it more by keeping the ball in tight. And yeah, the Rebels have shown how tough they are with their combativeness, particularly when just trucking the ball up tight. I reckon they should have played that a bit more and tried to wear the Ndrua down.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. There's a lot of people that were talking on socials around this game sort of being like a fork in the road for the Rebels. They win this game, they move on and they start talking about a great season and where that projects them to. They lose this game and they sort of fall back in the pack, and we start to sort of see that narrative starting to form again of Aussie teams with potential, but not being able to capitalize on that in games. It is unfortunate. The Rebels didn't play badly, but again, as you said, Hando, building on that point, they just didn't capitalize on the opportunities that were presented to them. And they fell into the trap of playing Fijian rugby in Fiji, which you can't do. You've got to really take your own game and try and dictate terms against the Fijian. Slow the ball down, keep it in tight, don't throw it around. Don't try and get into that Fijian style, which we've seen when teams go to Fiji and try to do that, it doesn't work. And the Fijians end up just counterattacking and scoring points off intercepts and breakaways and all that kind of thing.
Yep.
All right, I think that's time now. Then let's dive into our fans' match of the week, and that has to be the Waratahs and the Brumbies. Now, this was unfortunately won by the Brumbies, 40-36. An absolute screamer of a game. Fantastic. A lot of people calling this the game of the season so far this year. Definitely the best Aussie derby so far this year. I was lucky enough to be in Canberra for it. Fantastic atmosphere. Somewhat big crowd, I'll say, I guess. Just over 10,000 people there in attendance, which was good for Canberra. You were at home, Ando, watching this on the TV. What were your sort of general thoughts of that experience?
Yeah, look, I got to the end of the match and I was really frustrated that we'd lost. But I thought it was a brilliant game. I really enjoyed watching the game as a whole. Some of the tries were magnificent. Both teams played it in the right spirit, It was brutal, it was hard, but there was no foul play, I think, at any point throughout the game. It was all a couple of high shots, but that was just from tall people not bringing their arms down against small people.
The Hooper's try was quite cynical.
Oh yeah,
Hooper's yellow. I mean,
he had a couple of those actually. He's in a mood or something. But either way, I just really enjoyed it. So when I got into bed, my wife was like, "Oh, how'd the Waratahs go?" I was like, "We lost, but it was a good game." So I actually enjoyed watching it. So that was kind of my broader thing. I enjoyed it.
And you're like, I didn't drive 3.5 hours down there to have to drive back, so I'm happy.
I would have been so filthy. I was thinking of driving down and back in kind of the one night for the game. I'm so glad I didn't, just because it would have been filthy uh, being at the ground.
I got to say, like, actually being there, I didn't expect the Tars to put in this type of performance. I didn't expect them to push the Brumbies as far as they did and to really lead the game up into like the 65th, 70th minute. So I was really proud of the way they performed and the sort of tempo and upbeat style of rugby that they played. But I guess it just goes to show that you need to do your basics right when you're playing a team like the Brumbies. They will punish you. One or two things wrong and they'll score points. And we saw that with Ben Donaldson just not finding touch on the full, which from that kick, which ended up putting the Brumbies down into their 22, and they ended up scoring that try at the end there. So really good to see that the development of this Waratahs team and how they're starting to form a style of play in the last few games. But again, they're just not able to finish off those tight games and to really sort of see games out.
And I think it's a challenging one because the Brumbies just had a better bench and they were exerting so much pressure upon the Waratahs, particularly at scrum time. We were really struggling to deal with their pressure. I mean, the 2 yellow cards to Harry Johnson-Holmes and Botha, Daniel Botha, at the 31st and 32nd minute of the game just showed how much pressure the Waratahs were under. But how lucky was that that call from Nick Berry, the ref, regarding the obstruction from Caden Neville getting in front of, I think it was Nick Frost who
lucky.
It was lucky. Don't get me wrong. It was legal, like by the law, correct, and completely agree. But man, that would happen so many times in mauls.
Oh, the only thing I can say around that is that Nick Berry must listen to the podcast, because I can remember sitting here last week and talking about 3 tries the Brumbies scored where that same thing happened, where Frost or Neville ended up in front of the ball carrier and it was play on and tries awarded. So I think it was 100% correct, and I was happy.
Yep. Well, I'm glad that we're influencing Super Rugby Pacific refereeing. Please just make sure more of it goes in the Waratahs. Yeah, more in the Waratahs' favour, please.
Let's talk about. What do we want to talk about in this game? There's just so much to talk about. Waratahs' discipline. Now, that's something, when you look at the penalty count in this game, 16-6. 16 penalties given away by the Waratahs, 6 by the Brumbies, 3 yellow cards. No team is going to win a Super Rugby game, particularly at this level, with that amount of ill discipline and giving away those many penalties.
Yeah, I agree. It's as simple as that. I mean, a few of them came in that kind of 30-minute period where we were down the end of basically just defending our line against scrum after scrum. And so we considered 3 or 4 within that kind of phase of play, which was really kind of concerning. But also we had a couple that I thought were pretty unlucky at different points throughout the game, pretty marginal. The final ruck of the game where Jake Gordon goes in to try and steal the ball. I watched that back a few times and he freaking released it. He definitely released the tackled player and went in and got the ball, and he should have had rights to that. But Nick Berry was a little bit blocked with what he could see from where he was, so it must have looked like he hadn't. Anyway, so there were a few marginal ones there, but 16 doesn't lie, does it? So even if maybe 2 or 3 are marginal, Hooper somehow, in the statistics that I'm seeing, Hooper somehow has come away with not having any penalties against his name, just 1 yellow card. He had a few moments.
No, that's wrong.
Pretty.
That's definitely wrong. There was at least that. There was one scrum right before they gave the yellow card where Hooper comes through. The scrum sort of wheels and Hooper ends up kicking the ball out of the. Yeah, and so he penalizes Hooper for that. I think technically, it was penalized for standing up or wheeling in the scrum, but Hooper was also at fault there.
Yeah, correct. So I think he got away with not having that on a record sheet. I think Botha got that because he's got 2 penalties and 1 yellow card. Poor guy. So
I thought that was harsh. I thought it was really harsh for him. Yes, understand the Waratahs were in the D zone. They're giving away multiple penalties. No issue with the yellow card being given for repeated infringements, particularly at scrum time. But it was a short arm penalty. It was a pre-engagement thing. And he's given me a yellow card straight away. I was like, at least Like, does it not need to be a full arm offense to have a yellow card given? One thing is that the style of play that the Waratahs were trying to emulate was that New Zealand, that Kiwi style of in the D zone, when you're in your 22 and you're on your line, to give away a few penalties and to be okay with doing that as long as you're not conceding points. Now, it's definitely a work in progress for this Waratahs team, and they can genuinely take a lot of comfort out of the way that they were able to when they got down to 13 men. As you said before, it was lucky that try got overturned through the obstruction in the maul, but they ended up getting the ball up the other end of the field and scoring a try when they were 2 players down. Yeah, so that's a massive effort for us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry,
and it was just really impressive. No, you just cut out a tiny bit then, but we're all good. We're all good. Yeah, it just shows that momentum is a real thing within games, and so for the Waratahs to be able to hold the Brumbies out within that moment, get the somewhat fortunate decision by the AR about the obstruction, and then go up the other end and Jed Holloway barges over for a try. That was just a massive moment within the game, and so the Waratahs were able to basically have a 14-point turnaround in a way. But then soon afterwards, just before the break, James Slipper goes over for the first of his 2 tries. Not enough can be said. He was so close to getting a hat trick as well, except he knocked the ball on just at the bottom of the base of a ruck. So he was so close to getting as a prop. Probably his first and only ever hat trick. And I'm wondering if that's his first ever double within a game.
It would have to be a prop's first ever hat trick in Super Rugby, right? I can't think of another prop that scored 3 tries in a game. Hookers, yes.
Surely that's a stat.
Props.
That's a stat for us. Okay, Come on, people. Who's the most recent prop to have scored a hat trick within Super Rugby Pacific? That'll be really interesting to find out.
Yep. It'd be one of those blowout games against like the Southern Kings where the score ends up being like 56 or 76 to 4 or 5. Be one of those games, I reckon, where that might have happened, where everyone's got at least 1 try.
Look, there were some massive moments within this game. So obviously, James Slipper did incredibly well within this match, and he really kind of solidified himself as basically one of the best Australian props running around, and just an absolute legend within a Brumby sphere. But also, you had that incredible break by Lalakai Foketi and Izzy Parisi, chased down by Corey Toole and Len Ikitau. I was just amazed by it. It was brilliant rugby for the break to occur off a turnover anyway, for Foketi to get that far. He's not slow, and he was running as fast as he bloody well could. He's a pretty quick guy. He's had a few breaks before, and Toole was able to run him down, but then Ikitau never gave up. And so when the pass was made to Parisi on the inside, Ikitau was there, made the tackle, got up, got the turnover straight away. Absolutely brilliant play. And even as a Waratahs fan, I was applauding it, just recognizing how good rugby that was.
At the game, I couldn't actually see because we were down the other end where they started it. So I just saw them take off in front of me, and I'm up there cheering, riding him home. All the way, boys, all the way. And then he gets tackled short. And I didn't even see Toole coming across and cover defense. And I was, oh, no. There was a few cheeky Brumbies fans who chose that moment to actually get up and cheer back at me. So well done to them, I guess, that they had something to cheer about in that moment. And
in that moment,
to that point, the Waratahs had kind of been dominating the sort of the tempo of the game.
Yeah, they really had. And so it just showed kind of within the first 15 to 20 minutes, and the Waratahs have actually started quite slowly this season, but they got up to a 14-point lead up until Ikitau's first try in the 22nd minute off that Tamati Tua grubber, which was really well done. Really enjoyed watching that as well. And so then when the second half came along, it was try to Foketi, try to Slipper, try to Ngawangini Tuase, try to Samu, and then Lockie Lonergan got a try, and then the Brumbies were able to bring it home with a final one to Corey Toole. But they only took the lead for the very first time in the 65th minute of the game. And even then, the Waratahs were in the lead again in the 72nd minute of the game through a penalty to Ben Donaldson. So it was up in only in the last 4 minutes of the game with that Corey Toole try in the 76th minute that they actually were in a good kind of position and looked pretty comfortable in a way. So it's really brilliant game to watch, one for the neutrals. And if you're listening or watching, ladies and gentlemen, go back and watch this game on a full replay on Stan. Incredible.
Yeah.
That, as a Waratahs fan, loved it. Really.
And make sure you pause it. I think it was 49-36 on the coverage because you see me up dancing after Foketi, or I think it was the Foketi try.
No,
was it?
I say try. Yeah.
Was it that try? Okay, I can't remember who it was. I was too busy cheering.
Oh wait, no. If it's 49th minute, you're right. It was a Foketi try. Sorry, you're right.
Yeah, like I've got that saved on my wall. I've printed it off. It's gone straight to the fridge.
How good. Straight to the pool room, mate. Well done. Mate, this game was really entertaining. Absolutely loved it. A couple of players that I think really stood out. We're seeing more from Corey Toole, being able to influence the games at different points. Really interesting point of conversation with Toole, though, was brought up by Nelson Dale from Draft Rugby, who was pointing out the statistics of his defence. So he has a 60% tackle success record, which is just really poor. In all honesty, it's really bad. And sure, sometimes players will shoot up out of the line, miss a tackle, but they've done enough to slow it down for their job to be done, to kind of slow the play down and allow cover defense to get across. And like Ches and Colby would often do that for South Africa. But I mean, 60% is really, really not good. Any other players that you thought were standout, or any other talking points from this game?
I think Mark Nwangani is going strength to strength at the moment, and that try that he grubbed through and regathered himself was just pure freakishness. Like, that wasn't a team try at all. He took it all in his hands and finished it off superbly. I thought Jed Holloway and Ned Hannigan in the second row were fantastic for the Waratahs, and that's something that we've seen this year from the Brumbies, is their set piece and their lineup particularly has just been going from strength to strength. But both players in this game were able to get a few steals against the feed, and were really contesting at the line out and doing really, really strongly there. So that was awesome to see.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, mate, like I said before, I've repeated it ad nauseum. My body loved this game. It was so much fun to watch. And it was a really great moment. My eldest stayed up and watched the first half and really, really enjoyed watching it with me, which I was stoked for. And I was talking to him, being like, hey, mate, do you reckon you want to play rugby? Don't think you're enjoying soccer that much. Would you want to give rugby a go? And he was interested in the idea. So we might see if I can get a conversion happening, a convert to the great game.
So what's interesting now for both of these two teams moving forward, and just before we move off that point, I know that's awesome. I do hope we can get another rugby player there for the Anderson family. We'll work on that together. But what happens now for these teams moving forward? So the Waratahs now have a bye, and the Reds move into a game against the Reds up at Suncorp. So it's unfortunate in some ways that the Waratahs do have a bye, because these last two games, they've really actually started to take a lot of leaps and steps forward in progression. And they probably have in the first 4 games this season. It's one thing, Darren Coleman specifically said so in the break, that he probably wants to keep the players progressing and keep that momentum going into the game. Having a week off now is going to halt that momentum as they come up against the Force in 2 weeks' time. The Brumbies, on the other hand, have played and have travelled a fair bit these last few weeks. I think Bernie Larkham said in his press conference too that this is their second 6-day turnaround, and they've got 4 or 5 this year. So they go up to Brisbane. Do you think the Brumbies can continue their momentum?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that they'll be too good for the Reds. I've already put my tips in for next week, which is great. So I think
the Reds. Realistically, the Reds did push the Brumbies last time as well.
Yeah, true. It depends if the Brumbies are going to be resting any of their players, considering a short turnaround. But yeah, I just think again the Brumbies are too strong. They are. I think their forward pack is too dominant against the Reds. I think the front row difference between the two sides is too strong. I think the back line is actually pretty evenly matched, though. I will say that. Not having Ray Simone there is pretty significant. And yeah, neither of the 10s have been particularly on form for either side. The thing that I think will count against the Reds is that Clyde Thomas is a massive drop-off from Ryan Lonergan in terms of kind of the impact from the bench. I think the Brumbies have a better bench, so that'll count for them in the latter parts of what will be a tight game.
And that's something I've really enjoyed watching so far this year with the Brumbies, that they have both White, Lonergan, and Debrasini and Alessio, and that they can interchange that. And that happened in this game, that when those two came on, so when Debrasini and Lonergan came on, the tempo lifted, and the Brumbies were able to get the victory from that. And there's not a whole lot of other teams in Australian rugby, Australian Super Rugby at the moment, that have that ability to bring on two impactful backs like that, which is awesome.
Yeah, just looking at the kind of run home for the Brumbies, because we're kind of halfway through the season now, nearly halfway through the season. And they've got Reds away, Drew at home, Canes away, Rebels away, Highlanders at home, Force away, Chiefs at home, Brumbies at home, Rebels at home. So from that, they really should be getting they should be able to beat the Reds, the Drua, the Rebels, the Highlanders, the Force, and the Rebels again. So they should be getting 6 wins from their final 8 games as what I would be expecting of them. And it's just the Canes and the Chiefs, which are going to be the ones that are particularly tricky for them. So they've got a really good chance of finishing top 2, top 3 within this competition, because teams like the Canes, they have won, I think, 5 matches so far, but they've all been against lower ranked teams. So yeah, I think the Brumbies have got themselves into a really good position.
This is round 6. I think the Canes have lost more than that.
I think, aren't they 5-1?
I'm not.
I might be wrong.
Think they've lost 2, haven't they?
Check it out.
Anyway, that's fine. Let's finish up there.
Later. Thank you.
Let's move into our locker room segment now. So you run us through this. We've had a few questions that have come in on social media.
All right, cool. So for the locker room, firstly, can we say a big thank you to Vintage Red 25? He says the Reds were diabolical and didn't deserve to win, but still, why was Willie Hines' try legal? I thought it was obstruction because the halfback was not attempting to clear the ball. This one's pretty interesting. I don't think the Reds were diabolical personally. I thought that they did enough to kind of be pretty close within the game, and on another night could have won. But Mitch, was it obstruction? Was Willie Hines able to just kind of at the back of the ruck just pick it up and move it forward, and no Reds players were allowed to kind of get near because of the weird position of the ruck?
This is one of those areas of the law book where there is so many of this, the grey area, that it doesn't specifically say anywhere in the law book that you have to remove the ball from a ruck in order for it to be considered like playable or in play. So technically what he did was allowed. Whether it's fair on the other hand, I don't think it is. There's no way legally that the Reds can stop that try happening. You can't pick the ball up with your hands. You can't kick it out. You can't come around the side and pick it up because it's not out. You can't do anything. You can't go off your feet. You can't tackle him because he hasn't picked the ball out of the ruck. There's actually no way that you can legally stop it. So I think there needs to be an amendment to the law that says you have to play the ball or remove it from a ruck before you can score.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that idea of removing it from the ruck before you can score is important, and that's probably good language that you can be putting around it. I looked into whether or not it's obstruction because that was the language that Vintage Red had used, and the obstruction does not count in that circumstance according to the law book, which I have open in front of me. So yeah, obstruction doesn't come into play.
It would only be considered obstruction in that situation if the scrum half had picked the ball up and then run into the players in the breakdown. So if he had picked the ball up and then made contact with the breakdown while scoring, that's considered obstruction. But he technically didn't even pick the ball up. He kind of just propelled it forward. So again, it's a technicality. Is it fair? I don't think so. I'd love to see that kind of area of the game cleared up a little bit, because otherwise you do that every time. The pick and drive is dead. We might as well shut down. There's no need for a pick and drive anymore. You can just propel balls forward from the middle of a ruck.
drag the ball along the ground. Yeah. Yeah, look, it was an interesting one because if I remember correctly, the ruck was over the try line, but the ball
Yeah.
wasn't. So
It was
technically, the
short.
defending
It was called
players,
short.
yeah, it was called short. So technically, the defending players could have jumped over the players on the ground and been on the try line because there's no offside line when there's no offside line in the in over the try line. So they
In the
could
dead ball
have kind of,
area, yeah,
yeah,
but
in
the
the ball
ball
area.
wasn't in
No, but the
goal, because
ruck
if the
was.
ball was
No, but the ruck was.
well,
So you
technically,
don't have to
it's
be
around where
behind
the
the last
ball.
feet.
Yeah, you can be on the you can yeah. In that instance, you can be on the line. So
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So they technically
yeah,
could have jumped over, but it is a weird grey area. And I like your language of having the scrum half has to remove the ball from the ruck to play it.
there's nothing
Either in the
in
process of
the
passing
law
or in the
book
try.
around the ball being dead or live, but maybe it's something we
Mm.
need to talk about. Maybe technically, when the ball is in a ruck, it's dead. It's not able. You can pick it up. You can only use your feet at that point. So something like
Yeah,
that.
maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Joshua Yuvaraj. Not perfect, but comfortably the most Crusaders-y performance I've seen from an Aussie team in Super Rugby in that first 40 minutes by the New South Wales Waratahs. Clinical, remorseless, targeted, and precise. Everything Aussie teams tend not to be. More, please. Obviously, that's not a question. I will just say I love it when the Waratahs are compared to the Crusaders. More of that, please.
And in a positive way, and not a negative way around giving away 2 yellow cards and 16 penalties in the D zone.
Exactly. But it was good to see a lot more accuracy within the execution of the Waratahs in their attack. That was just really, really pleasing. So more of
Yeah,
that, definitely more of that. We did also have a question come in from Nathan Burns. Boys, I know you guys are a positive, look on the bright side kind of pod. So here's a challenge in the locker room this week. I'd like to hear the reason why you defend the reasons why Vunivalu is still playing Super Rugby Pacific. He's lazy, unenthusiastic, slow, regularly out of position, routinely overrun, and generally barely playing to a second grade club level. This is not being negative, just pure observations. Granted, the man is an athletic specimen, but surely there are 4 to 5 better wingers than him in Queensland rugby right now. Mitch, quick response to that, my friend?
Dollar bills, y'all. I think that's where it comes down to the fact that ARU has put so much money into signing Vunivalu and the potential that he has, that they just need to keep giving him minutes in game time in hope that he does start to pay off that. And that's purely why Eddie Jones has named him in his squad, because of the potential that he has. Not how he's been playing, but how he could be played if he was coached and molded and encouraged correctly. So, yeah, I tend to agree though. Like, if you're not performing and there's players on the bench who aren't getting game time, that's frustrating. That's frustrating for fans.
Yep. Mate, I would love to see Mac Greeley take his position on the wing. He is electric. Every time I see him play, I love watching him play. So he's someone I'd love to get more game time. Yeah, look, I really agree with you. I really agree with you, Nathan. I don't think he has been good enough, and that's why we commented quite at length about his Wallabies call-up as well. So take our thoughts about his Wallabies squad inclusion and kind of apply it to Super Rugby as well, and you probably got an answer to your thoughts and questions. Okay, final question, Shane Wright. Hi guys, currently the women's game is looking into a Lioness type touring group. Should they copy the original tour every 4 years to one country, or is it time for a format change? Seeing the Lions men every 12 years against my team is not doing it for me. That's a really, really good question. What were your thoughts when you saw this come in?
Yeah, so I tend to agree with where Shane's sort of going towards with that, around the potential to shift things up a little bit. And I would say let's do it every 4 years. So instead of let's twist it up. So instead of going to New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia every 12 years, once every 12 years, let's play it every second year, or every 4 years, whatever ends up working out the best, but swap it around. So we'll have one year the British and Irish Lions women's team comes south and they play down here in the Southern Hemisphere. And on the other hand, we'll do a combined Anzac 15 or Southern Hemisphere if we want to include South African women's team in that as well. And we'll go up there and tour. So let's just change it up a bit. We've always seen the Lions come south, which is always exciting. but how good would it be to see a Southern Hemisphere team go north, a combined team, and see how that goes? Play it in Ireland and England and Wales, and get the fans playing at home.
Yeah, that'd be really exciting. There's some good options of what it could look like. So we'd love to hear your ideas as well. So Shane, if you've got particular ideas of what you think it could look like, that would be great. You do say that seeing the linesman every 12 years isn't doing it for you, which I can completely understand. It does take a long time for the Lions tours to come back around, but it's unfortunately the nature of the beast as it is right now. So, Mitch, I think we've got to the end of the pod. Anything else we want to quickly mention before we finish up?
Just a big shout out to the Brumbies fans that were down there at GIO Stadium on the weekend. It was awesome to be down with you and cheering on the Waratahs. Good banter from a lot of the crowd and a lot of the people that were there. 10,575, I think, was the final figure there. So well done for getting over the 10,000. I think I saw it was the first crowd over that number since the 2019 quarterfinal. So great to see that the crowd's building. Whether that's New South Welshmen coming down to support the Waratahs, definitely a lot more than 13 people in blue around the stadium. So that was awesome to see as well.
Brilliant. And then what we might finish on is we have our good friend, Pie aficionado, Steve Lenthal, who's been able to get us the post-match press conference audio. So that will be coming up in a moment. And the first interview you'll be hearing, or the first conference you'll be hearing, is with the Brumbies, followed by the Waratahs.
There's actually a really good shout out from Darren Coleman in this around the quarterfinals. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. That's a good chuckle.
Awesome. All right, team. Have an awesome week. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Cool. Bye, everyone.